about it being unbiased. I read plenty of Salon and Slate pieces, and some other, sometimes even HuffPost.
Vox.
I read a lot of Vox. But I'm aware of the biases of the sites. I don't mind reading news filtered through a biased lens as long as the site is upfront about what its bias is. So I am aware of it and I can take that into account when I'm reading the piece.
Yeah, I basically do the same thing. If I'm clicking on something that I'm seeing on Facebook, I'm checking out the source of it. And if it's not something that I recognize, I make sure to see whether or not it is a satire, you'd think that normally you'd be able to tell satire, but with this administration, sometimes it's difficult. But I always make sure that I check that the source is something reputable before I try to share it or do anything like that.
Would you say Facebook is your major sort of filter or aggregator?
I use Facebook a lot. I've also have the Apple News app that I check regularly, which does the same sort of thing. It pulls the news sources from several different news sources, and I get daily alerts from like CNN and MSNBC, HuffPost, New York Times, all that stuff.
Yeah, when I see a link that someone has shared on Facebook, if I see that it's from Raw Story or Share Blue, I don't even click on it.
Mm-hmm.
I may go and Google the news, the information that was in the headline to see if it's also somewhere else, but I won't click on those links.
Mm-hmm. And I try not to share them, even if they have like cute headlines.
Yeah.
I try really hard not to share things that are not from reputable sources. And if I share something from a source that I'm unsure about still, then I will usually note that and be like, I don't know. I don't usually share things from this source, or I don't know about this. This seems weird, or whatever.
I even do that with the memes that have the quotes or statistics or things like that are put out there as actual news and actual truth. I have friends and family members that share everything that comes across their news feed that they agree with. And it could be a quote saying that from Abraham Lincoln saying that everything on the internet is false. It's just people who share things without taking even making the slightest effort to Google. It's so easy to Google to see whether or not something that you're sharing is accurate or not.
Or like just look at Snopes. Like Snopes usually does a pretty good job of at least giving you sources for where some of the stuff is coming from.
Yeah.
So, speaking of all of that, one of the pieces that I read leading up to this episode was from factcheck.org. And a whole year ago, they, right after the election, posted something called How to Spot Fake News that has some, their advice on how to spot a fake. And I looked through a whole bunch of different lists like this, and they all offer pretty much the same advice in slightly different format. But, the top piece of advice they always give is consider the source. So that's what we're all talking about, that, there are sources like the Boston Tribune, which sounds like it could be a real paper, but it's not. And so people share stories from there. And lots of other sort of fake news sites like that. Another piece of advice they give is read beyond the headline. So, the headline might sound really intriguing, but sometimes that doesn't really tell you the whole story, and so you have to actually read the piece. The next thing they say is check the author. So a lot of these fake news things don't even have a byline at all, or it's a byline, and you click on the author page and it's a totally made-up bio or something, or you could Google them and find out if they're a real person or not. And then, sort of what are the pieces of support? Are there any quotes in the piece? Who do the quotes claim to be from? Do they sound like things they would really say? Surely if Obama said something, it's going to be reported more than one place. Check the date. So that's what I was saying, that a lot of times something sounds really intriguing and then you realize it was written 4 years ago and it has nothing to do with the current events.
Mm-hmm.
Is this some kind of joke? So that's the satire piece of it. And then, it says, check your biases. And so that's a little bit about what we're saying about that. We really want to believe these news pieces that say what we want them to say. Like if a news story came out tomorrow that said Trump resigns, I'm going to want to click on that, I'm going to want to read that. And, of course, it's highly unlikely that it's true. And so, you have to sort of check your own gut there and say, all right, am I only believing this because it's what I really want to believe? There was an example of that last year. It was just about exactly a year ago. There was a piece that came out, I think it was in Mother Jones, that was reporting on this internet traffic between a Russian bank and Trump Tower or the Trump headquarters or something. And it looked like it was maybe the smoking gun of collusion. And I really, really, really wanted that piece to be true. And, it's still possible, but it's true. But it's clear now that the story came out too quickly before they really had the information that they needed to confirm it. And so then a day later, more pieces came out and they said, well, that probably doesn't really mean anything. And, who knows at this point? I don't think anyone a year later has figured out if it was true or not. But I didn't believe it because it was so well supported. I believed it because I wanted to believe it.
Mm-hmm. I've definitely been guilty of that before, of thinking, oh, that makes so much sense, or oh, I knew it, and clicking on a link just because I got excited and I thought, I guess that's confirmation bias, right? That I saw information and I thought, oh, this just confirms what I've known all along, instead of thinking about it critically.
Well, and the other way too, right? If a piece comes out that says Hillary was somehow dealing uranium for votes, or I don't know, whatever the heck is supposed to have happened, like I don't even want to read it, right? I mean, who knows? It could have turned out to be true. It seems like it clearly wasn't, but my bias makes me want to go, nope, that's clearly fake. I'm not going to read that.
That's a situation that I think, it really helps to just have a trusted news source and to just let it present what their editorial staff thinks are the most important stories of the day, So if AP or Reuters are saying it, it's probably pretty important, and almost certainly they've sourced it well, You talked about quotes. Are there quotes? So there's that. Are there any quotes? But also, are there quotes from more than one person is an important standard for judging whether a story is useful. And so I have some, what should I call them? Right-wing-ish kind of friends that we played softball with at one time. And, this one guy in particular was really harping on leaked stories, okay? And he was saying, all of my liberal friends are so eager to jump on these stories that are based on leaks, which don't give the name, where the person remains on background, like that sort of thing. And I think he found it distasteful. It just seemed like people should just be out in the light or whatever. But it does start to raise questions when you have a story that's entirely based on a leaked news source, which is anonymous. And so, like Kelly said, you want to believe it, but you should probably reserve judgment until someone is willing to go on record with their name, with their reputation, and more than one person is willing to do the same, right? It seems like those leak stories have diminished to some degree in the past few months. A lot of them were like reporting on conditions in the White House. And I don't disbelieve them. I still believe them. But I don't accord the level of belief that I accord to a story that has multiple named sources, that's in, AP or Reuters or Ipsos or, NPR.
Well, but what about, there were Washington Post stories where nobody would go on record, but there were 14 different sources confirming it.
If they get multiple people off the record, that is more believable than one person off the record. I agree with that. The reputation thing, Kelly asked me if I have any philosophy stuff that I can bring into play on this. And the reputation thing is a big point that a guy named David Hume relies on when he talks about the fake news of the 18th century, which was miracles, basically. He was a renowned atheist. Part of his magnum opus was discussing miracles and whether you should believe reports of miracles, okay? And having taught it several times, I can't just stop thinking about it whenever I think about fake news, because I'm like, oh, here's this guy who was talking about fake news way back in the day. Do you mind if I read you what his standard is?
Go for it.
So he was trying to offer a way to evaluate a story of a miracle, okay? And it actually strikes me as quite analogous, right? Because some of the things that, we're being asked to believe, Hillary and Bill run cocaine sex ring, like just random crap like that. It almost seems miraculous. So here's what he says, and you'll have to excuse the sort of 18th century English, but he says, no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle unless the testimony be of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous than the fact which it endeavors to establish. Okay? So what he's trying to get at here is the idea that if you receive a report of, say, the miracle at Fatima, right? You've heard of this thing where, like, the sun moves in the sky and thousands of people witness it and they report it and things like that. It's like if you're going to try to judge whether you think the sun actually moved from the vantage point of Spain or something at a certain time, you have to judge how miraculous the event is, and then how miraculous it would be for the sources of the reports of it to be erroneous, okay? And you always err on the side of the lesser miracle, okay? Mm-hmm. So if 50,000 people had high-definition cameras in their pockets and whipped them out and took video of the sun moving in the sky, it would start to seem more miraculous that all 50,000 cameras were faulty, that all of them were lying, that all of them were doing this, right? But in reality, most miracle stories tend to be based on the report of one person or the report of several people who seem to all know each other and have sorted out, what they're going to say beforehand. And so it's less miraculous to believe that they're fabricating it than it is to believe the purported miracle, okay? And so applying that to fake news, I hope it's obvious how you would apply it. Which is more miraculous, that someone is lying or that the story is true, okay? So Bill and Hillary run cocaine sex ring with, notorious pedophile billionaires or something.
In a pizza parlor.
Whatever it is. Which is more difficult to believe? That person X is going to lie about it, or that the story actually happened? The story is outlandish, right? It's got so many seemingly ridiculous features. And yet, if Dan Rather and, just think about 5 people you trust in the world. They all go on record saying that they've researched this, they've seen, reports and photographs and evidence, and they present some of those, it becomes much harder to believe that they're fabricating it, right, than to believe that the apparently fantastical story is true. He offers a few standards. He offers 4. 2 are definitely applicable here. He says, first of all, there are people with reputations to lose. There is not to be found in all history any miracle attested by a sufficient number of men of such unquestioned good sense, education, and learning as to secure us against all delusion in themselves, of such undoubted integrity as to place them beyond all suspicion of any design to deceive others, of such credit and reputation in the eyes of mankind as to have a great deal to lose, in case of their being detected in any falsehood. So I really like that. What